This is Nicholas Glover, Vice President of Advocacy for the Tampa Bay Chamber, and I want to thank and welcome viewers tuning in to the Tampa Bay Chamber's 2022 Virtual Candidate Forum Series. The Chamber focuses on policy, not politics, and while we do not endorse, this forum serves as a means to make sure that our members in the business community are informed on where candidates stand on the issues that are most important to them. Today, we are very excited to have with us Eric Lynn, candidate for U.S. Congress District 13 in Pinellas County. Thank you for joining us, Eric.
Thank you for having me, Nick. Good to see you.
Absolutely. So we are just about 6 weeks away from Election Day. Can you give us a brief 2-3 minutes or less update on how your campaign is going and what message you hope to deliver to voters in the final stretch?
Absolutely. I appreciate the opportunity to be here with the Tampa Bay Chamber. I'm Eric Lynn. I'm a proud member of the St. Pete Chamber as a small business owner, and I am running for the congressional seat that Charlie Crist is vacating here in Pinellas County, Congressional District 13. I'm a native of Pinellas, and I have spent my career on national security. I'm also proud to be endorsed by the Independent Party here in this race. My career that I mentioned, working on national security, I spent years as a legislative director and senior legislative assistant in the United States Congress working on policy. And then I spent 6 years as the senior advisor to secretaries of defense from both parties, both Republican and Democrat, working and advising our military, our leadership, and our troops, and was in Afghanistan. I'm running for this seat because I was motivated by a series of events that started on January 6th of last year. Well, I worked as a legislative assistant and legislative director in the United States Congress. On 9/11/2001, I was evacuated out of the Capitol. Alongside my fellow staffers and members of Congress, we used a special evacuation route to ensure our safety. And on that day, I owe really my life and a debt of gratitude to the brave men and women who put the plane down in Pennsylvania. Because as we know from the 9/11 report, the fourth target was the U.S. Capitol. And I may not be here with you today, Nick, were it not for their bravery. But then on January 6th, I watched that same evacuation route being used by members of Congress and their staff members. And it was not this time because foreign terrorists were attacking our nation, as on 9/11 when I used it, but because U.S. citizens were attacking the People's House, attempting to violently attack police and overthrow a free and fair election because they did not think that the outcome was correct. That was the first time in our history of over 246 years of peaceful transfer of power going back from Washington to Adams that we saw such violent attack on police and on the U.S. Capitol. And I vowed that day that I must do more. I must run for Congress to try to prevent something like that ever happening again. Now, I must tell you, when you ask how the race is going, Nicholas, it's going extremely well. We've gotten support from all across Pinellas County. I'm a native of the community. I grew up in Seminole, went to high school at St. Petersburg High School, and have spent so much time up in Clearwater and North County as well. And all across the community, I hear the same thing. Pinellas County is a moderate centrist county. And I'm running as the moderate common sense candidate to continue on the pathways of the late Bill Young, who represented this community for so many years and brought so much back to MacDill Air Force Base at CENTCOM and SOCOM, as well as to Pinellas County. And the people have responded so well for that. Because unfortunately, in this race, Nicholas, my opponent not only refused to be here with us today to share her views, but she describes herself. These are not my words. My opponent describes herself as an extremist. Her name is Anna Luna, and she continues to say that her views are extremist. I personally think that we need an economy that works for everyone. We must fight for small businesses and large businesses across this community in order to help everyone in this economy that we are living in right now. We must stand up for a woman's freedom to make her own healthcare decisions. We must protect our environment, as I have for my whole career. And we must work to protect our veterans, something that I've worked on as a veteran advocate and will continue to do so, hopefully, once in Congress. To conclude the answer on what the state of the race is, I am proud to share with you that the most recent poll that was done by a third party shows that I am leading in this race with a slight lead of 2 points. Now, of course, I'd like that lead to be larger, but I'm proud that the people of Pinellas are supporting me in this race, and we're going to continue to knock on doors, continue to reach out to leaders and businesses like yourself, Nicholas, and continue to get our message out that we need to elect a moderate, centrist candidate who shares the views of the majority of people of Pinellas and the Pinellas values, and reject extremism, particularly the extremism of my opponent, Anna Luna. Thank you for the opportunity to be here today, and I look forward to your questions, Nicholas.
Mr. Lynn, thank you so much. And I'm so happy that you are a member of a chamber that we work closely with. And it's great to have this conversation with you. So you mentioned a variety of issues, and I want to drill down just a little bit. Talk to us about the three most pressing issues that the next Congress will face. So you mentioned quite a few, but if we can drill down a little bit into three of them specifically.
Yeah, excellent. So look, I believe that the priorities in this race have not changed. The top priority continues to be an economy that will work for everyone. We are dealing right now with an economy that is hurting for a range of reasons, but I will tell you that we continue to see the supply chain delays affecting not only our small businesses, but also everyday consumers. You know, my wife and I sit around our kitchen table like the rest of the community does and have to deal with what our bills look like at the end of the month. And the supply chain has delayed for so long for a variety of reasons, but we need to actually solve that delay. And so I think one of the key issues that the Congress is going to play in the next Congress is what steps can we take to help on the economic side of things, particularly what I'd like to focus on, the supply chain delays. Some examples are, we now see container ships that are not only delayed coming from around the world, and we all know how China shut down for an extended period of time, and not in the shutdown the way we had here, but fully would not allow their workers to go to work for months at a time. Once those ships actually get to port here in the United States, sadly, if you've seen a port recently, either on the East or the West Coast, those container ships are just sitting. They're sitting there, and that is what continues to cause the delays. We need more longshoremen to be trained so we can get those containers off of ships. We need more truckers to be able to drive those containers once they're taken down to Florida and to the center of the country. And so I believe the way Congress can help is by incentivizing, putting more Americans back to work, tax credits, tax cuts for businesses that are hiring truckers, for longshoremen companies that are hiring longshoremen, and tax incentives for training. Because the government has a way to push the speed at which people are hired, and we need everything done at all deliberate speed right now to make sure that that supply chain does not continue to be delayed. And of course, while we're on the economy, clearly we must lower the prices of prescription drugs for our seniors. We started some of that, as you saw in the Congress this year, but it only allows negotiation on a small number of drugs. Our seniors need to have the prescription drug prices lowered day after day, and I will fight for that as well. And then the third piece on the economy is we must address affordable housing. You know, here in St. Petersburg, and as I know in Hillsborough as well, the prices of housing has continued to skyrocket. Yet, unfortunately, people who are workers, essential workers here in our community, are not able to live in the community anymore. So I've been an advocate for a long time to bring federal funding back to state and local programs, such as the one that Mayor Ken Welsh here in St. Petersburg has laid out to help on affordable housing. And I also am a strong advocate for keeping a percentage of new construction buildings, apartments and condominiums for affordable housing. Other states around the country have used 10%, and I think that's a good number to use. So that's a key piece for me. Now, you asked about other priorities. We can talk about the economy for the entire conversation, but I don't want to drag that on to be able to address some of the other issues. I do believe that a key issue in the next Congress is going to be a woman's freedom to choose. You have seen a court that has overturned a freedom that Americans have known for over 50 years. And I have personally called to codify Roe versus Wade to make sure that women make their own healthcare decisions between them and their doctor. Now, I feel it's very important to stress this contrast here, Nick. My opponent has called herself a pro-life extremist. She believes in banning all abortion rights for women. with no exceptions for victims of rape, no exceptions for victims of incest, and no exceptions even to save the life of the mother. That's barbaric. It's wrong. And I believe that the next Congress will codify Roe, and I will hopefully, with your help and others, be there to be able to do that. And then the third issue is really standing up for our veterans. I can tell you that having been a senior advisor to the Secretary of Defense of both parties, where I was proud to advise our military leadership and our troops and be in Afghanistan, there is no greater task to help people who have laid their life on the line for our freedoms here in America. And just one key example, you've witnessed something recently. Too many of our veteran brothers and sisters are sick, either from cancers or other lung diseases, because of the burn pits that had toxic fumes and problems. And there was recently a bill in Congress called the Pact Act that was brought forward to help bring aid, medical aid, and other type of support to those suffering that served in OIF and OEF in Afghanistan and Iraq. And sadly, my opponent, who again refused to be here with you today to share her own views, went on television to say that she would have voted no on the Pact Act to support our veterans. I want to make sure I'm very clear to everyone in the chamber and everyone around the state of Florida and the country. I will always stand up for veterans. Of course, I would have voted for the Pact Act, and we need to continue to do more to help our veterans suffering from PTSD and a range of other continued problems of homelessness and suicidal thoughts. We actually lose, unfortunately, one veteran to suicide every 14 minutes around the United States. And that is a number that we must fix and change. Now, finally, on priority, I will add the environment. When I was a legislative assistant in Congress, I was proud to help the team draft a bill known as the Everglades Restoration Act. It was the largest federal bill to protect the waterways in Florida, obviously here in South Florida in the Everglades. And we need more federal legislation along those lines that's going to protect our wildlife and our waterways. I've called for a bill that will prevent another Piney Point disaster. And I don't want to take too much time here on it now, but I'm happy to discuss it with you if you would like to. And I want to emphasize this point. We must protect our environment and our beaches, not just because it's the right thing to do, but because tourism is the economic driver of Pinellas County and of Florida. And when we had that Piney Point disaster and the largest red tide bloom of over 50 years, all of our hotels were not full on the beach. I would say they were almost empty. All of our restaurants on the beaches and those supporting service businesses and small businesses were not doing business as well, because over 800 tons of dead fish were washing up along the shoreline and tourism went dead. So the environmental protection is an economic issue for us here in Pinellas County and around the state of Florida. Those are what I believe the top four priorities will be in Congress. Certainly national defense is going to be a huge one as well that I am a strong advocate for, but those are where I think we're going to head. And I look forward to answering any questions you have on them, or hopefully you have the opportunity to speak on them further.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much, Mr. Lynn. So you mentioned the economy, obviously, and it's really difficult to talk about the economy, of course, without talking about workforce. So it's obviously no secret that we're struggling on the workforce side on some shortages in the U.S., in particular in the healthcare industry. We know that we're going to need 500,000 new nurses to keep pace with what the needs are as baby boomers age, as well as millennials get to be a little bit older. What can Congress do? What policies specifically would you propose initiating to help attract those new nurses?
Yeah, great question. Look, I would say let's start big picture, 30,000 feet. We need to get more Americans back to work in many sectors. I just had an excellent conversation with a group of teachers. We need more teachers in our schools. We're losing too many teachers every year, and it's become more difficult to hire them. Of course, what we need to do, both for teachers, and this is true for nurses as well, to your question, is we need to increase the salaries and the wages of our teachers and for our nurses. Now, you asked specifically what the federal government can do. I am a very strong advocate for tax incentives for training in positions that we need. Those types of tax incentives are really, really important. They're tax credits to businesses that are training. They're also tax cuts for people that are taking those courses. So if you are a nurse and you are attending nursing school, the federal government can help with a tax credit for you for that education that you are receiving. If perhaps you were one level of a nurse and you would like to become a nurse practitioner or a higher level educated nurse, those types of tax incentives are helpful as well. And then there's something that I'm a big supporter of, which are called work opportunity tax credits, or WOTCs. And we have them now for a group of people, actually several different groups across the United States. I've been an advocate for them for veterans. I actually think that we should expand it as well to spouses of active duty members, because that would be active duty members of the military, because that would be a great group that could go back for education or be hired if they already are educated on these particular skills to be a nurse or to be a teacher or so many of the other places, because a work opportunity tax credit gives money back to businesses for hiring those people that they need within their business, and it allows for the funding to go to both sides, so to speak, both to the worker and to the business. I will tell you this. I know that as baby boomers age, Pinellas County's median age is higher than most, even though the age has lowered since when I was a kid, and Johnny Carson joked that St. Petersburg was heaven's waiting room. We still have a large number of seniors. And as they age and as baby boomers go further into retirement, we are going to need the healthcare industry to understand how we can adapt. That means hiring more nurses, and the federal government needs to add those incentives that we just referred to. And I'll be happy to help in any way that I can in Congress. Thank you for the question.
Thank you. We talked about inflation for just a snippet. I'm curious, obviously, recently the president signed the Inflation Reduction Act. What additional measures, if any, would you like to see tackled to help manage inflation in the United States?
Yeah, great question. I addressed some of this when we were talking about the economic side of things. I think that in order to address inflation, we have to look at what's taking place with our supply chain. Our supply chain continues to be delayed. I mentioned it earlier. I was recently at a port on the East Coast where I saw all of those containers stacked up on the ships that are not being taken off. So while I said this earlier, it really bears repeating. If we want the inflation numbers to go down, then of course the supply must be increased. And that's why the supply chain delays have to be fixed so that more goods are getting where they need to get to. We can't do that without hiring more truckers. We can't do that without hiring more longshoremen. And we can't do that without ensuring that the costs that consumers are paying do not continue to rise. So look, there are a couple of things we can do when we talk about gas prices. I'm pleased, as I know you are, and all are, that gas prices have been going down consistently for the past 60 days. But there are things that we can do also to address that. Number one, I think we need to continue leaving the strategic reserve open, because it's something that while we are in the economic situation we must address that. There are short-term ways to solve this problem and then long-term ways. Short-term way is by keeping the petroleum reserve open. The next short-term way is that we have to deal with the fact that certain countries, such as Saudi Arabia, who we've done so much work with on the defense side of things, I was working in the Pentagon on defense partnerships with them. They need to increase the level of petroleum that they are supplying, because we are helping them on so many levels. They should be helping the U.S. economy. However, there are real long-term issues. The long-term issues that we have to deal with on energy, and they relate specifically to the economy, and what we're dealing with right now are that we must lower our demand for petroleum, for non-renewable energy, and we must work towards using renewable energy in a much better way. That means we need some of those tax incentives that I was referring to, tax credits or tax cuts for those that are using electric vehicles. We need tax credits or tax cuts for businesses that are using renewable energy, such as solar, on their businesses. And we talk about clean energy being used. We must incentivize businesses and consumers to lower our demand on non-renewable energy, and that will actually help with our costs as well. But it's a long-term solution, not a short-term solution. Now, on the other short-term piece, I just want to add this before I conclude. There are things that we can do on the food supply. we can lower crop insurance, and we can suspend some of the trade barriers that are currently taking place. If you talk with farmers and those that are supplying in the middle of the country, and it's true here as well in Florida, obviously, most of our crops are in the citrus field, but we have others as well, that the crop insurance right now, the federal government can help them be able to lower costs and can also help them to increase the supply that they are providing to the rest of the country. And I'm a strong advocate for that as well on lowering food prices.
Excellent. Thank you. I want to switch gears for just a moment and talk about congressional civility. What role, Eric, as you see it, does bipartisanship play, and how does that idea of bipartisanship affect your objectives coming into Congress if you're elected?
Yeah, great question. So look, I was proud when I worked in the United States Congress, as I mentioned, working on such bills as the Everglades Restoration Act, to do so in a bipartisan manner. I believe strongly that I'm running as the moderate common sense candidate for Pinellas County. And in order to get things done, we must do so with working together, Republicans and Democrats working across the aisle. I worked for secretaries of defense, both Republican and Democrat. There's a group in Congress that's known as the Problem Solvers Caucus. And I've spoken with some of those members of Congress. There are Republicans and Democrats that are a part of them. And I've told them that I hopefully, if I am afforded the opportunity to represent this community, that I will be able to be a part of that caucus. Because what they do is negotiate Republicans and Democrats to actually solve real problems, as opposed to standing on the sidelines like extremists like my opponents want to do and throw partisan bombs and actually never getting legislation done. In order to move legislation and policies forward that are going to help the people of Pinellas, Hillsborough, and the state of Florida, you have to work across the aisle. I just want to share a quick story with you, if it's all right. When I worked in Congress as a legislative staffer, after we would work on some of those pieces of legislation and negotiate and have policy arguments during the day, we would get together and have a dinner or a beer at the end of the night. Fast forward to when I served as a senior advisor to the Secretary of Defense. When I was working for Secretary Leon Panetta, who was a Democrat, one of my roles was to be a briefer for senators and members of Congress on policies we were working on in the Secretary of Defense's office. And I reached out to some staffers. I said, look, I'm coming to brief your boss, the senator, at 1:00 this afternoon. Why don't we meet for lunch in the cafeteria at 12, and I'll tell you what we're going to be talking about, and you can let me know any questions that the senator may have. People that I've known. And the response, this is back in 2012, the response that I received back was, Eric, happy to meet you for lunch, like you a lot, but we're going to have to meet in a restaurant or something that's off campus, because I can't be seen with a Democratic senior advisor in the cafeteria at this point in time. That is so truly disheartening to hear, Nick, that people did not even want to be seen with somebody of the other party. And I'm ashamed to say that the acrimony has gotten worse and not better. However, the Problem Solvers Caucus gives me hope. The members of Congress from both Republicans and Democratic parties that work together on legislation that I have told them I want to be a part of, and they've asked me if I'd be willing to be, hopefully, if I am able to win this seat. That is what we're going to do to move forward. That is what we need in the United States of America, is people working together in the center. We don't need extremists like my opponent who are standing on the side throwing partisan bombs. We need people willing to work together in the way that Bill Young did and others in this community.
Thank you. So obviously we enjoy a fantastic quality of life in Florida, but in spite of that, some families are still struggling financially in a variety of ways, including with childcare. Mr. Lynn, what actions should Congress take to support families with children?
Sure. Well, great question. Look, I'm a proud parent of 3 children. I graduated from Pinellas Public Schools, and my kids attend the Pinellas Public Schools. And we need to make sure that we are helping families with children, but particularly the families with children that need the most help, the indigent families that continue to have food issues. We need to help on that side of things. And one of the key issues that I support very strongly is continuing the child tax credit. The child tax credit has been so helpful in lowering the level of child hunger across the country. It's something that we should continue to have over time. And I don't believe that it should be ended. because I saw the numbers of child hunger before the child tax credit was put in place and increased. And I know what the numbers are now, which is far lower. If we end the child tax credit, we are going to continue to have child hunger across our country, and we should not allow that to happen in the most successful and wealthiest country in the world. One other aspect, we need to work on our family leave policy. The United States is the only first world country that does not have paid family leave for maternity leave, paternity leave, or for taking care of a aging parent. But in this case, you asked about children. The other first world countries offer paid leave for a woman who was giving birth for up to 3 months. In some places, it is even for 6 months or longer. The United States should be offering that 110% for mothers, and I would supporting it for fathers for a period of time as well. That is going to help with healthy babies. It's going to help with support for babies, and it's going to ensure that we do not have continued child hunger and child poverty along the lines that we've had in the past in this country. So those are two policies that I will focus on, but I can commit to you here today that as a parent, I will always be fighting for children. One final piece to add, I'm a proud member of the Pinellas Early Learning Coalition. And what we do in the Early Learning Coalition is fight for the opportunity that kids before kindergarten can go to free pre-K, and for those that qualify, they can also get free 3-year-old education and care. And the state of Florida offers that up till noon right now for only 3 hours, from 9 to noon. And what we do with the Early Learning Coalition is ensure that for parents who need it, there is an opportunity for extended education and extended care through the workday. Because who do you know that's a working person or runs a business that can get off from that business at noon? Everyone works a full workday, and I'm proud of the Early Learning Coalition that we work to help families with that, and I will support that in Congress as well for funds for pre-kindergarten to help families in need for childcare as well.
Thank you. Earlier, you mentioned your support for St. Pete Merrill Welch's housing plan. Housing availability, especially the attainable housing level, has become a major issue for Floridians, especially in your district. How would you, with your congressional hat on, seek to make housing more affordable?
Yeah, great question. So, listen, there are a variety of ways that we can help. There are a couple bills that are already in Congress that have not passed that I support. One of them is the first-time home buyer tax credit. We have some of that here in Florida, but I think the federal government should help to underwrite that. And I mentioned this policy earlier, Nick, but let's talk about it again. We are building so many new buildings, new construction here in Pinellas in particular, but I know you are in Hillsborough as well. Whether they're condos or apartments, we must set aside 10% of those buildings for affordable housing. They've been doing this in other states across the country. It has helped to solve the affordability and housing crisis, and it's something that we need to have implemented as well. One other piece that I would mention to you is, as we look at the permitting that takes place now, there is a great deal of barriers to permitting that are set up. And I think the federal government can actually provide funds to the local municipalities and others that are providing permits in a way that will allow those permitting barriers to be lowered and will allow for the affordable housing to be built easier and those that are there for costs to be lowered that way. So there are a variety of ways that we can help bringing money back to the cities and localities themselves and passing some of those federal bills that I mentioned to you earlier.
So we're winding down. I want to make sure that I'm respectful of your time, Mr. Lynn, but you talked about your chamber involvement at the onset. I'm really curious as to sort of what your plan would be for engaging with the businesses in your district following this election.
Yeah, great question. So, as I mentioned, I am a proud St. Pete Chamber member. I enjoy the work that we do, as well as the interaction and networking that it affords me as a small business owner. And as a member of Congress, I want to do whatever I can to help small businesses. What I know from my chamber experience is that the small business is the one that gets hurt the most when the economy fluctuates up and down. the roller coaster that we've seen in the past few years from the pandemic and the supply chain delays has affected the small business first. So I will continue to be a strong advocate for small businesses in Washington. That means tax incentives for new capital that small businesses need. That means tax credits and tax cuts for hiring in small businesses in some of the ways that we talked about, to include the work opportunity tax credit and others. And then I think one is just a philosophy. I will always have my door open to any businesses that are in our community here in Pinellas County. As a small business owner, I understand the trials and tribulations that businesses and small business owners go through. And as your member of Congress, as their member of Congress, I will always be willing to speak with them. They have my phone number. So many of them do now, and when we talk already, and that's not going to change when I hopefully, with your help and others, become a member of Congress representing Pinellas County in Washington.
It's probably the easiest question you'll get all day. Where can voters go to learn more about your campaign and or your positions on issues that are the most important to them?
Great question. I would encourage everyone to go to the ericlynnforcongress.com website. It has my policies, it has my background, and it has ways that you can help our campaign. We have a large number of supporters and groups. We have a group called Women for Lynn. We have a group that is Veterans for Lynn. And we are now picking up a great number of folks that are part of the Republicans for Lynn group. So you can sign up for all of those on my website, and happy to answer any questions that you have. You can send in questions to me there as well.
We touched on a variety of really important issues today, but before we wrap up, Mr. Lynn, are there any priorities that we haven't discussed, or something that you would want to reemphasize before we close out?
Well, here's what I really want to emphasize. Pinellas County has always been a bellwether county. We have been the county that has shown which presidential candidate is going to win for each of the last 8 presidential elections. That means to me that this is a moderate centrist county. They elect common sense people like Bill Young, like David Jolly, like Charlie Crist. I'm running to be the moderate, common sense member of Congress from this community. My opponent is running as an extremist. I don't need to call her an extremist, Nick, because she calls herself an extremist on television. She says she's a pro-life extremist and wants to ban all women's health rights, even to save the life of the mother. She said on television she would vote against veterans' support in the Pact Act. We must have somebody who represents the Pinellas values that you and I and this community shares. So I appreciate the opportunity to share what some of those values are today. And I look forward to speaking with the Tampa Chamber again in the future. And any further questions that you may have, I'm happy to answer them. Thanks, Nick.
Thank you. On behalf of the Chamber's members and its board of directors, Mr. Lynn, we want to thank you for your time and for joining us today, and for your willingness to serve in an elected office. It's not lost on us how difficult it is to kind of put things aside and focus on doing what's best for your neighbor. So we appreciate that. And with that, that concludes today's candidate forum.
Thank you very much. And let's just say I hope that my opponent decides that she will attend the next forums, because people deserve to hear her views as well, instead of her shying away from them.
Thank you, Mr. Lynn.
Thank you.